All right, for more on this, Murat Aslan joins us now. He's an assistant professor and military expert at Sabahattin Zaim University. Murat, thanks for joining us here in the studio. I'm sure you've been following this closely. But I first want to address what that guest just said about how Russia views the U.S. pulling out of these arms treaties. Yeah. So they absolutely have a point there. However, what he did not mention was, let's look, for example, at the INF treaty. Multiple U.S. administrations have been frustrated by what they say is Russia's repeatedly violating that treaty. That's why they pulled out of that one. So there's a point to be made on the other side, clearly.
Well, this is a typical example of, war of words.
Yes.
Because all parties, party to any type of problem, argue something with clear justifications of what they are doing. Well, it's very clear that, yes, Americans had withdrawn from the INF. On the other hand, Russia was violating it because they had developed, missiles that can hit any point in the globe.
Right.
On the other hand, I think we have to combine these arguments with the Ukraine case because the problem in this situation is not the INF itself, but Ukraine. Think that there's a country promised that they will not be attacked, and they just handed over all the nuclear arsenal back to Russia by the encouragement of the Western countries. And there was a pledged security guarantee that there will be no attack to Ukraine. That means it's a guarantee of survivability.
Exactly.
But today, Putin just delivered an order and said, okay, be ready for the nuclear arsenal. Well, on the other hand, we have to identify one thing. This order implies two things. One of them is just a clear message to the Western world that once you apply sanctions, he's ready to respond in a way. Well, this is one thing. On the other hand, there is another thing that should be integrated with the realities on the ground. It's what? All the Russian weaponry is compliant with the prerequisites of a nuclear warfare. And in the meantime, they have tactical nuclear warheads, especially for artillery. So if they use nuclear weapons, it will not only be in the forms of missiles hitting, a large-scale state, but, fronts on the ground, in the battleground, with tactical nuclears. But it's a danger because no difference in terms of the impact and the outcomes obtained.
Yeah, absolutely. And wouldn't you say that by making even these threats, Putin is proving the need for deterrence and defense in Ukraine more than any other place? I mean, he's proving the argument of the West that he has nuclear weapons and he could be willing to use them, that he could invade. We just saw him invade. I mean, aren't these moves and now these additional threats only backfiring on him for the long term?
I think we should assess such type of developments in accordance with the serials of the events, in accordance with a time scale. It's clear that Russia could not advance in a tempo that they could grab a piece of, or not a piece, but a huge land in Ukraine. Well, they advanced, though they lost a lot. For instance, as of yesterday, it was 4,300 Russian soldiers deceased. They are killed in action.
Right.
So it's a huge number in 3 days. So yes, he may be in a hurry just to grab more, to have a leverage in, for instance, negotiations with Ukrainians in Belarus.
Yeah.
Another thing, once there is a type of halt in the battleground, tactical nuclear weapons can easily clear all the routes that Russians could advance much more. So I think his political objective somehow needs a further military refreshment. Well, he sees nuclear weapons as a way, but he's changing everything. For instance, let me give you a very significant case for that. Nuclear weapons has always been a point of deterrence during the Cold War.
Yeah.
There was a famous conception like mutually assured destruction.
Right.
Now, it's not about deterring, but it's about what? It's about, threatening.
Exactly.
So that's the thing. And then we should question exactly how we can manage the nuclear arsenals worldwide, not only Russia,
Yeah.
Think about India and Pakistan. Think
Yeah.
about Israel. Think about the other countries who possess it. And in case of war, now they will repeat the same thing. They will threaten by the nuclear warheads.
Yes. I mean, this is an argument for why this needs to be controlled and why everybody having them, we don't know that that's going to deter anyone.
Yeah.
And as you said, it could do just the opposite. All right, Murat, great to have you. We're going to bring you back. Let's go back now to our military expert, Murat Aslan. So what do you make of the effectiveness so far of this Russian assault? Because in the press and on social media, so, take that with a grain of salt, if you will, much is being made about, in some cases, the obvious inexperience and in some cases bumbling confusion of Russian troops inside Ukraine.
Well, in order to assess a military campaign, it doesn't matter if it's conventional, unconventional, regular or irregular, doesn't matter. First, you should check political objective and later then military objective and what has been done on the ground in terms of modus operandi. Well, political objective was what? Within the words of Putin, to save Donbass, right? It was the initial statement of Putin. And later then they expanded it. I mean, they said, okay, not only the Donbass under the control of, Russian control, but also further because Donbass is more than that. And later then he talked about Odessa, for instance, and also the overall Ukraine, and he declared that Ukraine is actually Russia. So there's an expansionist political objective pending 2 days because he just expanded his, the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And later then, the military objective appears at a type of transformation of this political objective to military objectives.
Yeah, there are many, though, who expected this to last. I mean, experts were saying that if Putin wanted to take over Ukraine, it could be a matter of 2 days. And that now he's clearly surprised that he's facing the resistance that he is.
Actually, assessments were correct because the Russian army has been equipped with, armored vehicles, mainly, running fast, endurable, and firepower is really great, with an integrated nature. For instance, for a regular military formation, think that they have organic assets for air defense, engineering, etc. So everybody expected a fast advance towards the heart of Ukraine, mainly to Kiev because it's very close to the border. But it didn't. Why? That's the essential question. I think it's about 2 things. The first thing is that Russia is using the old arsenal of weaponry.
Oh.
I mean, we can now see, for instance, Gas-65 rather than Ural 375. Because Gas-65 is a vehicle, a regular vehicle for general purpose, and it was a vehicle like 50s or 60s.
Oh,
and we see it. And we saw tanks left abandoned across the roads. That means they were out of order and was left behind. So they had a problem like maintenance, logistics, and durability because of this old arsenal. The second thing is about the tactic of Ukrainians. They first hit the tires of the vehicles, especially the tires. Later then they used ATGMs, anti-tank weapons, and destroyed the whole units of Russians.
Yeah.
So it increased the level of casualties from the Russian side.
For sure. So based on the statements that are coming from Russia, we see 2 things. We see threats of greater escalation, but we also saw a pretty quick willingness to go for discussions with Ukraine. Is this Putin looking for a way out of this? Or is this him looking for another excuse to expand?
Well, this is a political maneuver because you have to justify what you are doing on legitimate grounds. Well, this is a war of aggression. I mean, if you just go and visit the conception of just war, this is exactly an aggression that is totally prohibited in the UN Charter. And what Ukrainians are doing is currently self-defense. That means legitimate. But if you just open a way in accordance with the UN Charter, like negotiation or accept the mediation of a third party, then you say, okay, I'm prone to peace, but they are not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they just indicated Belarus as the location for a negotiation, but it's not a good thing because Lukashenko was sitting with Putin on the same table.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a kind of game of diplomacy.
Of course. And Lukashenko is making some of the worst threats that we're hearing moving forward. I mean, he's threatening that this is going to turn into World War III. So, okay, we'll wait and see. Murat, good to have you. We may speak to you again soon, but thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Murat Aslan once more. So we're talking about, and this is always the conundrum of, you can take these actions, but when you take actions over time against any country, they find ways to insulate themselves and find workarounds so that it's possible that over time things like sanctions do less and less of a job to change the leader's actions. It's always a question of what is going to change Putin's course. In your view, what is the most effective thing that Western nations can do in this situation?
Well, a very good point and discussion. You know, sanction is what? I mean, what is the context?
And it always depends.
And what is the concept of sanctions? Sanction is, you know, if you just have a framework of sanctifying something, somebody, etc. Sanction is something to deter, something to prevent, and something to push the other, change his or her mind. And also, you know, have the other one comply with certainly identified norms. It would be Western, Eastern, or Northern, doesn't matter, but some norms. On the other hand, in this thinking, I mean, if you apply this thinking to Russian case, well, I don't think that Putin will not be affected personally from the sanctions imposed. On the other hand, for the Western perspective, the sanctions must change politically, though it should not harm the social life in Russian life, because if or once Russian citizens are depriving of the basic needs on the streets, that means now there will be a type of polarization and radicalization, so there must be a limit for that. Well, in the Ukrainian case, currently the sorts of sanctions are good to address it. I mean, it's not only about economy, because they apply sanctions to certain banks but leave some others.
True.
Because there must be a type of interaction for the citizens. On the other hand, please do not forget something. If radicalization is somehow pumped in Russian thinking, they have a huge potential for ultranationalism.
That's true. That's a good point.
It's a danger. I mean, there must be a boundary for that.
So the question is always leverage. And, you know, when people in the West are questioning their own governments, one question is always, what leverage do you have? Are you giving away leverage? So in your view, from a military perspective, because what we're seeing right now is very much a military issue, what leverage does the West have to prevent Putin from continuing this assault on Ukraine?
I think you should focus on vulnerabilities. You know, the most vulnerable aspect of Putin, or, you know, Putin's vulnerability is what? Failure.
Wait, is what?
Failure.
Is failure. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Because if he obtains a type of achievement on the ground, mainly in Ukrainian battleground, well, then his appetite will increase and will be committed to obtain more and more, for instance, in Moldova or in Georgia or etc.
Yeah.
On the other hand, a failure, sorry for my mispronunciation.
No,
I
think that's a really good insight. I think that's really interesting, that that's his soft spot, is looking bad, you might call it.
Yeah. So then he will lose his credibility.
Yes.
First, for the ones who are fans of him, because they see Putin as something not shaken, you know, not shakeable. And second thing, if once Russian community is exhausted, then they will question Putin. And in military terms, this is what I believe, Ukrainians may transfer this conflict to the territories of Russia. So then a huge warfare inside Russia in an asymmetric way will start.
Yeah.
This is the second danger that Putin may face in future if this conflict becomes a type of protracted one.
And that's why I was wondering if now that things maybe aren't going in early days as Putin might have planned, is he looking for some face-saving way out now? Like, is he seeing the writing on the wall that now is a good time to somehow make these talks work? Especially since over the last several years, when you look at Russian involvement in, for example, Syria, we would often talk about how expensive that is for Russia, how they don't really have a lot of time to keep pumping money into a conflict like that. So a protracted conflict in Ukraine for Russia also not a great thing for their economy. So is now the time for Putin to escape and act like he achieved something?
Actually, Putin guaranteed, safe exit from this game. How? His initial political objective was Donbass, and now he has more at the south and north.
Good point.
That means once there happens a type of ceasefire and freeze the conflict, they have soldiers not only in Donbass, but somewhere else in Ukraine.
Yeah.
This is one thing. The second thing, and the most important, this is what I believe, now they have captured the north of Crimea, and they have soldiers at just the junction point of the Dnieper River and the Black Sea.
Yes.
And it will change completely the politics at the north of the Black Sea. Think that all the borders of Romanians, Moldovans, Russians are somehow confused, and it will affect exclusive economic zone allegations and sharing the gas reserves. So at the end of the day, if Putin shakes the hand of Zelensky, he has a leverage. On the other hand, he wants more. That's another thing.
All right, these are excellent points. That's why we have you here, Murat Aslan.
Thank you.
Thanks again.